We're going to call to order the Budget and Finance Committee meeting for Monday, March 2nd, 2020. We'll dive right in. Resolution RS 2020-202, Mendez, Murphy, and others, approves an intergovernmental agreement between the Tennessee Department of Transportation and Metro Public Works for signal maintenance for the I-440 traffic operational deployment of Blue Toad Spectra power over Ethernet data collection devices. Is there a motion? All right, it's been moved and seconded. See a couple people in the queue. Councilmember Sora.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarification. I know it says data collection, and I was just curious as to what type of data we're collecting. Just wanted to know.
That's an excellent question. Mr. Cooper, do you know?
My understanding is it captures the last 6 digits of an individual IP address for Bluetooth devices. So that's cell phone, iPad, whatever is in your vehicle. The vehicle itself has Bluetooth capability, a lot of them. And so what it does is as you go through an intersection, it captures those 6 numbers. And then when you go through another intersection, it captures it so it can tell how long it has taken you to get from that one intersection to another, which can be used to help with traffic signalization timing and things like that. It's for transportation planning purposes. So it captures the last 6 digits, but not the full 12 digits of the IP. And so it's anonymous.
Any other questions, Councilmember? All right, Councilmember Sledge.
Thanks. Is there somebody from the vendor here?
Public Works may be here. I don't know.
I don't know if somebody's here from Public Works. Looks like yes.
Good afternoon. I'm Sharon Wallstrom with Public Works. There is not a vendor representative here. We were trying to get the vendor representative to come to the Public Works Committee meeting. We received some questions today from a council member, and they are working on getting those answered for the committee meeting.
Well, I think this committee needs that information too. Maybe I can ask to anybody who might know. Regarding the Bluetooth and how it works, does the Bluetooth have to be turned on in a car or for it to work?
It's my understanding it does not.
So it can track the vehicles regardless of whether the Bluetooth is turned on?
Yes, but only the last 6 digits, which does not give you an indication of whose vehicle it is or what device it pulled those numbers from. You know, it can't, the software can't distinguish between the car's Bluetooth or an iPhone.
But does it collect both as they pass through?
I think it collects everything as it passes through.
Any Bluetooth device?
I think that's right, but
whether it's turned on or not?
That's my understanding. I could be wrong.
Okay.
This is way beyond my level of comprehension.
That's okay, John. I'm not holding you to it. Does anybody have an indication of how long that data is stored?
It's stored indefinitely.
Oh, okay. It seems to me that we've got questions that the vendors should be here to answer. I'm going to move to defer those 2 meetings.
Is anybody going to second that motion? Let's have discussion on the motion to defer for 2 meetings. Councilmember Porterfield, are you interested in being heard on that?
Yes, thank you so much, Chair. I agree with Councilmember Sledge. There are some questions that we would like some clarification on. But one question, how does this legislation differ from the legislation that we heard last term? I don't know if there was a deferral last term and it's being brought back, but I remember Councilman Bettany and myself had concerns about this very legislation.
So based on the concerns that were raised at the end of last term, Public Works went to TDOT, the agreements with TDOT, and they were able to amend the contract language to include provisions that deal with privacy and ensuring that the data remains anonymous. And if they ever change that policy, then it gives Metro an automatic out to terminate the contract.
Okay, thank you. So that kind of addresses some of my concerns, making sure that there's no way for individuals to be able to be tracked using this data. And I did have more questions I think should be answered by the vendor. So I would support Councilmember Sledge in deferring this. Thank you.
Does anybody else wish to be heard on the motion to defer for 2 meetings? Seeing nobody else in the queue for that, we've got up before us a motion to defer this for 2 meetings. It's been properly seconded. All in favor of the motion to defer, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we recommend deferring for 2 meetings. Before the next 5 items on the agenda relate to financing, and because this is the first time we've dealt with bond-related resolutions this term, I asked Mr. Cooper to prepare a reminder/tutorial about the way different components of our financing structure work, and hopefully we'll be able to have that then available on the video for the public and other council members. So before we get to the next items, I'm going to ask Mr. Cooper to go through his presentation.
Okay, I'll try and make this quick and interesting. No promises. So there are several items on the agenda today related to capital financing. The first is a bond deauthorization, which I'll go through in a few minutes. Then we have the capital spending plan resolution, 2 water sewer bond resolutions, and a 4% fund resolution. So I'll cover those briefly. So the first thing to understand is the distinction between the capital improvements budget and the capital spending plan. The capital improvements budget is a planning document that is approved by the council every June. It does not actually authorize any funding or appropriate funds. It's just a project eligibility document. So the only way for a project to get into a capital spending plan is if it is first included in the capital improvements budget adopted by the council. So all of the projects that are in the capital spending plan that is before you today are in the capital improvements budget. The capital spending plan is really just another name for an initial bond resolution. So Metro, in order to spend money on projects, issues municipal bonds. And so this is necessary for all of the projects that you have going on in your individual districts. They all have to be part of a capital spending plan initial bond resolution in order to start. Municipal bonds can either be general obligation bonds, which are backed by the full faith and credit of the Metro government and have a tax pledge associated with them, or they can be revenue bonds, which are backed by a specific source of revenue. For example, the 2 Metro water sewer bond resolutions are backed only by ratepayer funds, not by the full faith and credit of the government or a tax pledge. So the first step to start a capital project after it's included in the capital improvements budget is the approval of the initial bond resolution. This allows Metro to issue commercial paper, which is a form of short-term financing that allows projects to get started until the long-term bonds are sold, and that's usually done every 3 to 4 years. Metro has a commercial paper program for both the general government spending and for Metro Water Services. So once the initial resolution is approved and commercial paper is issued to start the projects, every 3 or 4 years, a bond resolution will be brought to the council to retire that commercial paper. So it's important to note that when you retire commercial paper, you're not funding any new projects. Those are projects that have already been approved and have already been funded using commercial paper. So it does not add any new debt for Metro. It just converts it from short-term debt to long-term debt. The two water sewer bond resolutions that are on the agenda, the first one, 214, is an initial resolution, kind of like the capital spending plan, only for Metro Water projects. So that would allow new spending on projects within Metro Water Services capital spending plan. Resolution 2020-215 authorizes $330 million in revenue bonds to retire the outstanding commercial paper that Metro Water has for projects that are already underway or have already been funded or completed, and also refunds a portion of those bonds to, or refunds a portion of previously issued bonds to generate savings for Metro. Also on the agenda is a bond deauthorization resolution. So this would deauthorize a little over $60 million in general obligations from a 2018 bond sale. So these bonds from 2018 were issued at a premium, meaning that the investors paid more than the par amount for the bonds at the time of the bond closing. And investors will do that for a number of reasons, primarily to achieve a higher interest rate, a higher yield on the bonds, and for tax reasons. So when bonds are purchased at a premium, that means that a lower amount of bonds were actually needed to be sold than what the council authorized. So I'll give an example of that. So let's say that Metro authorized the sale of $100 million in general obligation bonds. And those bonds were sold at a premium of $1 million. Well, what that means is that Metro, let's say it needed to retire $100 million in commercial paper, it would only have to issue $99 million in bonds to do that. And so the remaining $1 million is not needed and can be deauthorized, which in turn reduces Metro's total outstanding par indebtedness by that amount. And then last, you have a general fund reserve fund 4% fund resolution. The charter requires that 4% of all General Services District general fund revenues be set aside every year solely for the purchase of equipment and repairs to buildings. Those funds cannot be used for any other purpose. The charter provides that those funds are to be appropriated by resolution of the council. And the way the process works is the individual departments will let finance know periodically what their 4% needs are. And finance will periodically, usually 3-4 times a year, file a 4% resolution as revenues come in to fund those projects. So these are all what you have before you today, that list of projects. Those are all projects that the department submitted to finance, and finance determined that we had the ability to fund those projects at this time.
Thank you. Questions about the presentation, Mr. Dreffel?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Question, is it possible to identify within that bond amount the specific projects that paid for? So if you paid $100 million for the bonds, what did that actually specifically go to?
Finance can do that. They can track it based on the particular bond issue to which projects were funded.
Okay, thanks.
And over the last term, it's worth mentioning that we created some legislation to make it so the initial resolutions have to lay out by category and then some amount of detail what the initial resolution is authorizing. And what Mr. Cooper just mentioned is there's always some variance over what the initial resolution has, and then some projects never quite make it and the cost isn't exactly the same, and there's always a cushion built into the initial resolution. And so for the answer to the question of what it actually got spent on, that's an after the fact that finance can provide.
Just a follow-up question is, so how readily available is that information where we could get that? So as we approve the bonds, we'd have a sense of, we spent $50 million for this and $25 million for this. And it just gives us some framework of the volume of dollars we've been spending.
Are you talking about what the plan is at the time of the initial resolution, or what the actual spend was?
Actual spend, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, y'all can provide that. Yeah, once bonds are actually sold, then they can provide that.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, Councilmember Allen, about the presentation?
Yes, two questions. So one, if I understood you correctly, every bond gets voted on twice. We vote on it when we say we're going to start using commercial paper to actually get the projects going, and then once we've hit the limit on the commercial paper, we vote again on that same correct set of projects to actually issue the bonds to pay back the commercial paper, and we wait until we've got like a good interest rate or something that means it's time to actually buy those bonds.
I think that's true, but I think the second vote, I mean, when we get to the second vote to issuing the bonds, like there's no way to
choice.
Right, there's no real choice at that point because the money's already spent.
We got to pay it back, but we always vote twice.
Yes,
and that second time
you
is
have to vote twice.
Right. If we voted once, we know where there's going to be a second vote that we're obligated to. And then secondly, in the debt reports, if I understand this right, we now specifically list the commercial paper indebtedness as well as our annual debt service payments. Is that correct?
Yes.
So at this point, we now know everything that we're going to have to pay somebody back
Right.
on an annual basis. That seems like a really good idea. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Suarez, about the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just curious about the 4% reserve fund. Do departments, can they just ask for it throughout the year? Is it limited to 4% of their budget, or is it just 4% of general?
No,
and
I mean, theoretically, one department could
spend the whole
spend
thing?
all of it, but obviously the finance department, they get departments to prioritize that spending so that it can be equitably spent for the needs throughout the government.
That's what I wanted to be sure of. Thank you.
And finance can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's finance isn't just getting requests and approving. They're running a process to make discretionary decisions about what's really needed and what it ought to be and how to prioritize things. Anybody else about the presentation? All right, so we're going to go into resolutions 212 to 215, which are the 4 bond ones. And I'll go ahead and let everybody know that I've talked to finance and the administration in advance, and the intention from my perspective is to get out on the table any questions anybody has about any of these, but then to defer each of the 4 to the next meeting so that we make sure that there's enough time for everybody to absorb what we're doing here. But today's the day to ask questions. Don't hold anything back till next time. So with that, Resolution RS 2212, Mendez-Welsh, reduces the authority of metro government to issue general obligation bonds pursuant to certain initial resolutions previously adopted by the Metro County Council. Is there a motion? Councilmember Allen.
Thank you. I'm wondering if someone can explain why people paid a premium for these bonds. Is it because we paid a great interest rate and would we have been better off paying a lower interest rate? How do we make that decision?
I don't know that we would be better off. I mean, it makes the bonds more marketable when you sell them at a premium, and obviously you want to get as many investors interested as possible. It's to their benefit because, yes, they do get a higher interest rate over the long term, but we get the benefit of not having to issue as much debt as we otherwise would have on the front end.
Do we have an analysis that shows that the annual debt service payment is therefore lower? Seems like that would be the goal.
We don't actually have that analysis where we run if we did have a premium or not. But as we're structuring the bonds, the investors will come back and say, this rate works better for me at this time. So during that whole sale process, we're negotiating with them on when we're going to get the most interest in the bonds and how we're going to sell them. And cash flow is only one of the reasons that they do that. Sometimes there's a tax advantage to them that I don't understand, but there are other reasons. But cash flow and setting the premium is really one of the, as John said, one of the marketing tools. And we don't go back after the fact and do an analysis. We could, but I'm not sure we get the same sale, same structure on the sale. So it wouldn't be apples to apples even if we did that.
But the bond issuer is clearly doing some kind of economic optimization to compare a lower interest rate to a higher interest rate.
Bond buyers are.
Bond buyers.
And then we as a metro government and with our financial advisor are going through the same process they are. And we look at the analysis for, this rate now versus a lower rate and more bonds issued. That's a continuum that we go through as we're doing the actual sale on the day of the sale.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing nobody else in the queue on this, I would entertain a motion to defer one meeting. That's been moved and seconded. No further discussion. All in favor of moving to defer one meeting, say aye. Any opposed? All right, we recommend deferral for one meeting. Next is RS 2020-213, Mendez Young Welsh. Issues general obligation bonds of metro government in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $154 million. Is there a motion? Mr. Sledge.
Thanks. I think this is for the administration. It's not about anything in particular, but more about the CSP as a whole, just kind of where we think we are in light of all the discussion we've had over the last several months regarding the budget, getting that fixed, and kind of what our communications are with the comptroller and how those communications may or may not have influenced the decision to go for this amount in the CSP.
Our finance director, Kevin Crumbo, was in near daily conversations with the comptroller's office, checking in with respect to how our budget is proceeding, and we are led to believe that we have their faith and confidence, but obviously we've agreed to, with them, submission 1 month ahead of time with your cooperation so that they'll have the ability to look at it a full 30 days before the charter requires it. And I've forgotten your second question.
Regarding did those conversations influence where y'all landed on the amount? To say we feel like we're in a sweet spot here, and if we go too high, we might not have as good of a conversation. That's what
I'll take the opportunity to say that this is sort of an evolving process. When we first got the comptroller's letter, I think there was a general sense, at least initially, that there probably would not be a capital spending plan. As reports started coming in and it looked like we had the opportunity to do a capital spending plan, it was clear from the outset that it would have to be modest, probably a fraction of what they've been in years past. And this one indeed is about 30% of what we've typically done. This was not part of your question, but I did want to take this opportunity to submit that when the Gulch Bridge reallocation occurred and we had roughly $18 million unanticipated, that was not done in the format that I had, at least in my council days, seen, where the administration would ask council member, what do you need to make this approved in your eyes? This was done on a purely objective basis, turning essentially to the engineers to determine what were the urgent repair needs across the county, irrespective of council member districts or politics, to be honest. And a similar approach had to be taken here just because of the modesty of the amount that we have to play with. This was focused on those public safety urgencies or those episodes where failure to fund a project would lose funds on our part, a matching fund, for example, that was available from state or federal grants. And with one or two exceptions, there were occasionally some where we were just under a timing obligation. The payments to the satellite cities, for example, that is due August 1st, and we are not likely to have another capital spending plan before that. So that had to go in here. Confined to those very tight parameters, the 154 represents that and nothing else. We were very grateful to the council for their indications, both in individual conversations and the council as a whole, for how they've been partners with us. The council in January waived the rule prioritizing the capital needs. That was helpful because we necessarily could not have met those priorities based on those criteria. We were also very grateful, frankly, to Council Lady Benedict for her report pointing out that prioritizations can't be based on the politicization of playing council districts off one another. This has to be done on a countywide basis, focusing on public safety first and foremost, and that's what these are. There are council members in here that have projects near and dear to them for their districts that are not in the capital spending plan, and we truly regret that, but that is most every council member, and that includes the mayor. There are projects near and dear to him that are not within this capital spending plan simply because of the limitations. But we do have the input from the comptroller's office that this is a satisfactory, not an unsafe amount, and can proceed accordingly.
And I'll just do one follow-up on that, and I don't expect you to have the answer to this, but just, I guess what I'm trying to get a sense of is we're going to defer this one meeting, and I think the intent to defer that one meeting is to continue the conversation and make sure all council members have an opportunity to analyze, get questions answered, things like that. If in the course of that conversation, there's something that comes up that does meet all the criteria you're saying, countywide, public safety, all that sort of thing, I guess what I'm asking is there room to have that conversation fiscally, politically, however you want to say it, or does the administration feel like they're coming forth and saying, council, we want to have this discussion, but we don't think there's any wiggle room or leeway?
No, absolutely. We acknowledge that there's an amendment process here that is appropriate, and if there's a council member that believes that a project meets those criteria, he or she would be encouraged to submit that amendment. Now, the initial restriction on that is that the amendment would have to come from within the 154. It's a reallocation of the monies within the capital spending plan. If it is an amendment that would not seek that, but would instead seek additional monies, you're right. I don't have that answer for you today. I don't know what the comptroller's reaction to that would be, but I will find that out hopefully before Thursday and certainly before the deferred consideration of this.
Gotcha. Okay, that's helpful. Chair, I only have one other question, and another member may have it too. It was about the matching grants for MTA and RTA, just what those entail. I didn't know if anybody was here to answer that.
Well, let me give my perspective on those first two questions you asked, because I've got almost the same perspective, but a little bit different. There was never a time when the comptroller said, don't do a capital spending plan. I think it was reported, you guys know that I was invited to go with the mayor to the meeting he had with the comptroller in the first week of October, right after getting sworn in. And the mayor specifically asked about doing a small capital spending plan in that meeting. The comptroller was absolutely clear that a city needs to keep spending on capital needs. And so it's not a matter of the comptroller, I think, having been against it, but there is the how much is the question. And I feel confident based on the conversations, ongoing conversations I'm having with the director of finance, that given the fact that we don't know what the revenue structure is going to be because we haven't had the budget process yet, I think pushing I believe the comptroller would say the same thing he said to us generally is like, do what you want on capital spending, just make sure you can pay for it when you get the budget done. So I think that if we embark on having amendments, then that probably sets off a bit of an arms race among us. I don't know. I mean, if something is urgent, of course, people should bring it up, but I think that'll get us off into some difficult territory. And then what was the other question you had?
As far as general questions, I think that addresses everything. The specific line item I was speaking to was Mike referred to matching funds that we needed to do, and I wanted to just get a little more info on the MTA and RTA matching funds.
If there's anybody here or not, they can speak.
If there's nobody here, that's okay.
Looks like we do have somebody from WeGo.
Good afternoon, Eric Byer with WeGo Transit. I'm also joined by Felix Castrodad, who's our Director of Planning. Our capital spending request is essentially a 10% local match to leverage what is 90% federal and then a state local match on formula dollars. On the MTA side, we're looking at money that's coming out of federal state of good repair, which would be for overall maintenance. It's also looking at buying buses and vans to support our ADA service, as well as new shelters and overall maintenance of the system. On the RTA side, we're looking at track maintenance. So essentially, with the requests that you have here for the combined $4.6 million, it's going to be leveraging 90% federal and state dollars.
Thank you, that's helpful. On the service portion, you mentioned about it going mainly toward access ride, the vehicles.
Correct, and overall general maintenance,
Okay.
Operations, yeah.
On the shelter side, I know at times there have been projects where WeGo has identified shelter locations or shelters that are, let's say, at end of life. Do y'all have that information that you would be able to share to say, we think these are the shelters that would be built or replaced?
We have a shelter committee. Felix can probably go a little bit deeper on that, but generally the demand for shelters overall far exceeds what we have in funding. A while ago, we came up with 100 shelters and have gone about fulfilling that. The list of requests, like I said, is far greater than what we're going to be able to fund and develop in this round. Felix, I don't know if he wants to add a little bit further. Basically, our focus is adding new. We really haven't had any fall off, so to speak, that need to be completely raised, so to speak. We focus more on the maintenance of what we have existing. Felix, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
We do have a list of shelters and locations that need to be improved, so that's part of the request, but also we have another line item for or as part of our plans for new shelters. So we have locations that are undersized, that have shelters that are probably not enough for the amount of riders that we pick up at specific locations. So that includes replacing those with bigger shelters, those that have fallen in a state of good repair to maintain those and replace them, but also including new locations where shelters are needed that currently don't have any shelters at this time.
So just acknowledging that it sounds like what you're saying is what this matching fund's not going to cover all the shelters that WeGo feels like need to be done. If y'all could help provide us, because we get questions as members about particular shelters and we don't know if they're on the prioritization list or not, or stops that might get a shelter in the future, would it be possible for you to provide those for us, with us the full knowledge, knowing, hey, all 100 or however many of these may not be funded, but at least we know what's a priority for WeGo, so we can then communicate that to our constituents?
Yeah, we can certainly provide that list. We have, as Eric mentioned, the list of shelters or locations that needs goes over the amount of funding that we have available. But we do have a list, and we have a priority where those locations fall in that list, and we have certain criteria for that meets the needs of shelters. But we can provide that to you.
If you all can provide that to Mr. Cooper, he'll distribute to the council.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Chair.
Councilmember Syracuse.
Thank you, Chair. It's gratifying to see BL 2019-77 go into effect here. This is more logistical. Thanks to the council staff for including Exhibit A in the analysis, but shouldn't Exhibit A be attached to the actual resolution itself?
It is. There's an Exhibit A and actually an Exhibit B that are both attached to the resolution that identify the project categories.
That said, they aren't online right now, so maybe we can ask the clerk's office to get those online.
Yeah,
too.
they're not. I just checked and they weren't online, but we'll see if we can get that done.
That's good. Thank you.
Councilmember Swope, do you want to offer your amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman and members of the Budget and Finance Committee, this is an odd request because usually modifying a capital spending plan for any particular specific reason within one district is not exactly the right way to do things, something I'm well aware of. But I have a public safety issue going on right now, and it is going to get continuously worse to a ticking time clock that starts pretty much the middle of November in 2020. And by that, what I refer to is the intersection of Edmondson Pike, Mount Pisgah, and Banbury Station, which is quite honestly one of the worst intersections in my entire district, if not all southeast Nashville. We have about one accident a week at this intersection and have for as long as I've lived there. 3 mayors over the last 4 years have promised this project. It has been in the capital improvement budget for 3.5 years. The reason it was not in the capital spending plan last year is I really didn't want to have to pay for the land that it was going on. And in doing so, a developer came to me, and it took about 1.5 years to do the deal where the developer gave the land to Metro. So as of right now, we already own the land to do this. The biggest problem I have coming at me like a train is the expansion of Nolensville Road, which TDOT agreed and this city agreed to do literally 3.5 years ago. Speaking to Clay Bright, who is the TDOT commissioner, they plan to put a spade in the earth November of 2020. That means that the 60% of traffic that comes through my district right now goes up Nolensville Road with Williamson County and Williamson and Rutherford County license tags are now going to get all diverted down Holt Road and straight up Edmondson, which is still a 2-lane country road that all my constituents kind of like being a 2-lane country road. Without this roundabout, it will literally take some of my constituents in the subdivisions surrounding Banbury and the Mount Pisgah subdivisions. It'll take them over an hour to get out onto Edmondson Pike. And I don't even want to know how many accidents this is going to cause. So with all that said, and with this having been voted on last year, at the last time this council body voted on prioritizing everything in the CIB was last June. This was the number 2 thing to do in the city. I was incredibly proud and honored by this body at this little itty bitty project in my little bitty district was ranked number 2. So with that, I implore you to take $1 million of the $6 million in paving money and save the constituents of my district from being in an absolute mess as we move forward.
Do you want to make a motion for that?
Oh, yeah, I would move the amendment 1, I guess.
We'll need to ask someone to make that motion. Since
Or
it's
is it
not
A?
committee.
What's that?
We'll need to ask someone to make that motion.
I guess you'll have to ask whether a committee member will make that motion since you're not on the committee. So
Oh, that's right, yeah. Would any of you committee members please move my motion?
there's been a motion, and it's been seconded. So for discussion on this, Mr. Sledge?
I find myself in the weird position of Councilman Swope having more trust in a government entity than I do with TDOT. But I guess I think we had about 30 projects that tied for second, if I remember right. What I was going to ask is, if we go through this, I'm very willing. I think we should have the discussion about the project. What I was going to ask is, if we're willing, after we have the discussion, to defer it as well one meeting so that we can keep having the discussion about this, because I think we know more of these are coming.
I think that's Mr. Swope's intention. So let's have whatever the discussion is about this. Mr. Druffel?
I was going to mention the same thing, so deferring one meeting so we have more time to study, because I know many of us, as you described earlier, have similar issues. I would have to say, having lived in that area, that he has every right to say that's a pretty big deal.
Right. I don't disagree with that. So that's it for being in the queue. What I'm going to ask a committee member to move to just defer consideration of the amendment to the next meeting. And, we're a little light on attendance because we've got, I guess, scheduling around the primary tomorrow is interfered with us. But if we're going to consider one change, then anybody who's got a thing in their district, we're going to let's just do it and consider them all next time. So with that, somebody want to move to defer consideration of this to next meeting, the amendment? All right, all in favor of considering the amendment the next meeting, say aye. Any opposed? All right, we'll consider it next meeting, Councilmember.
Thank you.
And then, seeing no further discussion about Resolution 213, somebody want to move to defer that to the next meeting also? Seeing no further discussion, the motion to recommend a one-meeting deferral has been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? All right, we recommend deferring one meeting. Before we move on to the next bill, I want to welcome, we've got a Sister Cities delegation that joined this riveting conversation from Edmonton. And so thanks for coming to visit us today. Really appreciate you stopping by. Thank you. All right, now we're going to move on to Resolution RS 2020-214, sponsor Mendez authorizes the issuance and sale of Metro water and sewer revenue bonds in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $500 million. Is there a motion? All right. Councilmember Allen.
So again, this is just the initial one that then enables us to start spending commercial paper?
Correct.
Okay. And do we, at this point, already know when we think that will hit as an actual bond issue that will then result in a debt service payment that we actually have to make?
I don't think we know at this point. I mean, right now, the next resolution is taking out commercial paper, retiring commercial paper. So Metro will have considerable amount of capacity for projects, and I think it will be as we get closer to maxing out the commercial paper program for water that you would see another long-term bond issue.
Then I'll ask my question on how long it took to get the other one filled up. Okay, thank you.
Well, and we have somebody from the water department. Because I know some of the discussion, Councilmember, is going to relate to, and we might as well go ahead and ask how this ties in with the rate increase and the capital spending anticipated by the rate increase. Because I think that goes to your point about how long is this going to be. So I know the delegation was walking by. Did you hear the question?
Yeah, I did. The first part of the question was the time.
Right.
Which was our last bond issue to refund the commercial paper was in 2017. And then the refunding that we're discussing or will be discussing in the next resolution is so that we can free up that commercial paper so that we can do all of the things we talked about with the rate increase. Chief among those was the consent decree program, which is the $400 million project out at Central, as well as replacing all of our infrastructure. Remember, we talked about the aging water and sewer infrastructure during the rate increase discussion. So that's a very, I mean, I'm not getting into specifics unless you really want me to, and I can give you a list. But those are the types of things that we talked about with the rate increase that said, this is what we have to do. And so now's the time, and we're excited to do it. That answer your questions?
Councilmember Druffel.
This is an overall question, but is there a projected finance debt forecast where we can see the amount of debt as we're incurring and what was projected on current projects? It's not just water, but it's just overall. You know, we hear we have $4 billion in debt. How do these debt payments factor in? We know we've already spent it, but is there a forecast based on what we currently have and what we're doing to get and to sort of visually see what's happening?
We'll get an answer in a second, but I would suggest that we think about GO and revenue bond separately, because I think for revenue it's important. I think for this revenue bond in particular, the important question is whether it matches the financial modeling of the rate increase. But I'll hand it over to the administration table or water if they want to answer it.
Yeah, it just triggered an overall question more so than these revenue bonds.
Sure. Actually, there is a debt report that comes to council. It'll be coming earlier this year, but it's in conjunction with the budget submission that lists out all the outstanding debt. And then there's also a presentation that I give, the treasurer gives, that talks about future, looking forward on the currently authorized debt, when we project that the spending will be with that, and the next kind of forecast for debt service required for that. So.
Seeing nobody else in the queue, I have a couple of questions for the department. One is a recurring theme last term was that a couple times we came close to authorizing a flood wall without realizing what we were doing. And I want to make sure that there's nothing about this legislation that would approve paying for a downtown flood protection system.
No, sir, it's not in the CIB.
Okay. And then the second thing is, when we did the conversations here a couple months ago about the rate increase, one of the things that was real clear was that the council had never been aware that the department was on the distressed water department list. And in asking specific questions about that, I think we were basically told that we did a bad job of asking questions, and that's why we didn't know the full truth. And so I want to just ask, based on the conversation you're hearing here today, is there any inkling you have that somehow we're not fully understanding what we're supposed to be doing here?
No, sir. What's before you today is just the realization of what we discussed during the rate hearing or the rate increases. And in particular, we will meet our bond covenants and ratios that we put up on the screen and said, we're not going to meet them if we don't do this. That our rates fully take care of that at this point.
All right. And is the department on track to get us the first update report that I think we're supposed to get during the summer?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you. Seeing nobody else in the queue, I'll entertain a motion to defer this one meeting. All in favor of recommending deferral one meeting, say aye. Any opposed? All right, we recommend deferral for one meeting. RS 2020-215 Mendez supplements substitute resolution number RS 2010-1442 to authorize the execution, terms, issuance, sale, and payment of water and sewer revenue bonds in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $330 million. Is there a motion? And Mr. Sledge.
Oh, thanks. So sort of similar question in the vein that we've been talking through. I remember we were provided a project list several months ago from water that kind of indicated the need. And I think the top project would gobble every cent of this because it was basically just renovating our entire treatment plant system. So I wanted to try to see if there was an idea of, again, prioritization that may not obviously be in the revenue bond issuance, but that members can get an idea of.
Sure. So we have to think, when we talk about those giant projects, that one in particular, and we've got Mill Creek is coming up, and it's also a large project, it's really about timing. So when we throw out that $400 million number, it's over 5 years. And so it's not going to eat up all of those prioritizations. I mean, what we look at is our risk, and we prioritize based on risk.
So what would you consider is the highest risk that needs to be addressed?
Consent decree is high up there,
okay,
but we can give you that list, and we reprioritize constantly.
Gotcha. So you're saying that you could send to Mr. Cooper your
Yes.
most recent prioritization list?
Well, we can send you our capital and what we're working on, yes.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Seeing nobody else in the queue, is there a motion to recommend deferral for one meeting? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? All right, we recommend deferral one meeting. The next one is the 4% fund resolution, and that's one where, from my perspective, we can play it by ear. If there's not substantial questions, we can go ahead and recommend approval. If there are a lot of questions that need answering, we can recommend to defer one meeting. I think the goal from the finance department's perspective and mine is to get this done before we get to the budget process, so there's time to defer one meeting and still pass it in March. So RS 2020-216 Mendez Stiles Welsh appropriates $16,689,200 from the General Fund Reserve Fund for the purchase of equipment and building repairs for various departments of Metro government. Is there a motion? Councilmember Suara.
To the Finance Department, I noticed that, and I think I raised this question before, that the justification of form that is completed by the department, the yeas and no's, at the back of the form. There is a point in there that asks if the finance department was contacted in determining the amount, and it just varies. It's a yes, it's a no. So do you have a process? So, I mean, if you can just walk me through what is the requirement for requiring money, and how do you determine which projects gets included?
So we should have Greg McLaren here, who is over our capital planning dollars. I think Greg was here. There he is. So he can at least address more of the process questions and how the requests come in.
Okay.
I'll use the opportunity while he's walking up to tell, oh, never mind. Go ahead, Greg. Thank you.
I'm Greg McLaren from the Finance Department. The yes and no questions, I think they were established several years ago by the county. They wanted each request that a department submits to go through the 12 or so questions, and they're is it Fed state reimbursable? Have you checked with surplus property like that? So they're just yes and no through that. The departments look at them. I look at them. If there's one that was a mistake, we can change it. But that's just, it's by council order that those were listed.
I guess, do you take that into consideration in determining what to include? Because I said that some of them said no to checking with finance on the, so I'm just asking, do we even consider them at all in making a determination of what to fund?
Not, depends on the type of item being requested, like software, you wouldn't want surplus software, or you wouldn't want a surplus fire truck, something like that. So, I mean, it depends on what it is, but we don't, finance doesn't say, you're not getting this unless you buy it from procurement. You know, that's up, I mean, from surplus property. That's the department's decision to make that. And that's not, we don't rank them that way.
I guess for me, I was just wondering what the form is there. It's not just the surplus, it's also the idea of, did you check with finance on the amount and things like that? And so I don't know if we need to revamp the form or not use the form, but when I'm looking at the form to see how we make a decision, just curious that it's not consistent. I guess that's my observation. The other question that I have, Mr. Chair, how many people do we have in the law department?
A lot, I don't know.
Lawyers, 32.
Okay, all right. Thank you. I saw 31.
Councilmember Timms?
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about the money allotted for parks and recreation, the regional neighborhood community centers that money is going to. Just wanting to know the specifics. Which community centers are we giving money to, and any specifics about exactly what is being purchased with the fund?
Monique Odom, Director of Parks. That figure is for across the system, so it is equipment and supplies for all community centers in general, just depending on need. So fitness equipment, any kind of resources they need for programming and repairs.
So I'm thinking about North Nashville 37208 in particular. Those centers have a lot of need. So is there an emphasis being placed on those centers, or is it just an equal amount across the board? Because that's not always equity.
No, it's not always equity, and it's evaluated based on need. So if there is not a need at a particular center, then we would not allocate funding for that center.
So do you already have a list of projects you want to do, or you're still evaluating that?
We have a list.
Is that a list that can be provided?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
If I can get that, that'd be great.
Yeah, could you send that to Mr. Cooper?
Will do.
Anybody else? All right, there's nobody else in the queue. We currently have pending a motion to recommend approval. If somebody feels that we should do something else, go ahead and press your button. Otherwise, we'll be moving. Right now, it's a motion to recommend approval. Nobody else is in the queue. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? All right, we recommend approval. Thank you. RS 2020-217 approves the employment contract for the Chief Medical Director of Metro Government. Is there a motion? And there's been a motion. It's been seconded. Seeing nobody in the queue, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? We recommend approval. RS 2020-218, Mendez Welsh approves an amendment to a grant from the Tennessee Department of Children's Services to the Davidson County Juvenile Court to provide state supplemental juvenile court improvement funds to employ a youth services officer. It's been moved and second. Seeing nobody in the queue, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? We recommend approval. RS 2020-219, Mendez Murphy Welsh approves an option agreement between Metro Government and Wallace Mitchell and authorizes the purchase of property owned by Wallace Mitchell. Is there a motion? It's been moved and seconded. Seeing nobody in the queue, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? We recommend approval. RS 2020-220, Mendez Welsh authorizes the Department of Law to compromise and settle the property damage claim of Metro Government against Vertical Solutions in the amount of $100,000, and that the Department of Law be permitted to accept this amount as a complete resolution of Metro Government's claim. Is there a motion? It's been moved and seconded. Seeing nobody in the queue, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? We recommend approval. RS 2020-221, Mendez, Roberts, and others approves an amendment to a contract between Metro Government and Kronos, Inc. to provide time, attendance, and advanced scheduling software, hosting equipment, and technical support. Is there a motion? It's been moved and seconded. Seeing nobody in the queue, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? We recommend approval. RS 2020-222, Mendez authorizes the Department of Law to compromise and settle the personal injury claims of Samina Sibtain and Hafiz Sibtain against Metro Government in the amount of $37,000. Is there a motion? It's been moved and seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? We recommend approval. RS 2020-223, Mendez authorized the Department of Law to compromise and settle the personal injury claim of Heather Shear against Metro Government in the amount of $15,000. Is there a motion? It's been moved and seconded. Councilmember Allen?
Thank you. I'm just wondering if it said that the consequence was a written reprimand. Was there any driver training required?
Oh, hold on.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yes, Captain Gilder with the Metro Police Department. There was a defensive driving training that was required, but this was the officer's first at-fault crash. So,
Any other questions, council member? All right, seeing nobody else in the queue, there's a motion to recommend approval. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we recommend approval. RS 2020-224, Mendez Pulley Hancock approves a Homeland Security grant from the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency to the Office of Emergency Management to support the implementation of state Homeland Security strategies to prevent, respond to, and recover from acts of terrorism. Is there a motion? It's been moved and seconded. Seeing nobody in the queue, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? All right, we recommend approval. Moving on to bills on second reading. We start with BL 2020-184, Sledge, Nash, and others. Amends the Metro Code to require contracts procured through an invitation to bid process to become effective no later than 30 days after the award is made. Councilmember Sledge?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to defer 2 meetings, please.
There's a motion to defer 2 meetings. Is there a second? Seeing nobody else in the queue, all in favor of deferring 2 meetings, say aye. Any opposed? We recommend deferring for 2 meetings. BL 2020-185, Mendez, Hager, and others, amends the Metro Code relative to providing funding and guidelines for public art projects. Is there a motion? It's been moved and seconded. Councilmember Allen.
Thank you. I want to thank somebody for getting money for repair of artwork. I think that's a great addition to just putting artwork in. If Carolyn Benson is back there, she and I have been talking about this for years, so
Well,
kudos to you or somebody.
it wasn't me, so whoever the responsible somebodies are, thank you. Anything else, Councilmember? All right, seeing nobody else in the queue, there's a motion to recommend approval that's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, we recommend approval. All right, BL 2020-186, Mendez, Swope, Welsh, amends the Metro Code to extend the expiration date for the assessment, collection, and administration of the additional hotel occupancy privilege tax at 50 cents. Is there a motion? It's been moved and seconded. I'm going to ask Mr. Cooper to give an explanation that might anticipate some questions.
This is the implementation of a state law that was originally approved in 2008, and it authorizes an additional 50-cent per room night tax on all hotel and motel rooms in the county, and that can only be used to promote events in Nashville. So since 2008, the fund has accumulated $35 million, which has then been granted out to 21 different events. Some of those events are recurring, like New Year's Eve, 4th of July, Music City Bowl, and then some of them are one-time, like the NHL All-Star Game. The distribution of the funds is done by a committee that by state law, the state law sets forth who serves on the committee or who has to be represented. So that 5-person committee makes determination for spending the funds, and the check and balance on that is all expenditures have to be approved by the Director of Finance. So there is Metro involvement in making sure that those funds are being spent to promote tourism and promote those events. The original state law had a 6-year sunset in 2008. It was extended once, and then in 2019 was extended again for another 6 years. So all this ordinance does is approve the additional 6-year extension.
Thanks. Councilmember Allen.
Thank you. I guess Mr. Cooper would be who I'm directing this question to. What's the relationship of this to the different 6% hotel motel taxes that are also partly dedicated to promotion of tourism activities? Is this parallel to that?
It's parallel to that. So the cent that goes for the direct promotion of tourism, that's of that 6 cents, that is what funds the contract with the CVC. This is a separate fund that is just used for marketing of events and some support of events. So it's an additional tax on top of the regular 6%.
Gotcha. And would it be appropriate to look to this to perhaps pay that $2 to $3 million of overtime that we've accrued each year for special events?
The state law says that it has to be used for the direct promotion of tourism.
Promotion only.
And so that would not be an appropriate use.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Sledge.
Thanks, John. I think you can answer these two. So in the analysis, and you mentioned a few of the events, there's about a third, I think, of the 21 events. Where can we get the full list?
I actually have a spreadsheet that I got from the CVC. I will forward that to the council. It has a list going back of all the events and the amounts each event has been funded.
Gotcha. Okay. And then I want to make sure I understand, again, looking at the analysis, I want to make sure I understand how the committee is made up. There are slots, and I'll just read this out for members. So it's one person nominated by the Hotel and Lodging Association, one person says from the hospitality industry, one person it says explicitly from Gaylord, and then one person who operates a business in the CBID and a chair. it appears from the analysis that all those people are appointed by the mayor.
They
Is
are.
that correct?
Correct.
And they do not come through us. It is simply
That's
a
correct.
mayoral appointment. Okay. Can we get a list of the committee members as well?
Yes, I'll reach out to the CVC and get that from them.
Okay. And do we have any idea, I'm sorry if I'm missing this, how long the term is that those members serve?
I don't recall the state statute listing a term. It may, I'd have to look that up, but I'll check on that.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
So there's nobody else in the queue. We've got a motion to recommend approval of Bill 2020-186. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? All right, we recommend approval. We've got two more here. Bill 2020-190, Rosenberg, Mendez, Henderson grants the purchasing agent the authority to extend the terms of contract for project design and construction phase services for the Davidson Branch Pump Station and Equalization Facility pertaining to the Department of Water and Sewage Services Overflow Abatement Consent Decree Program. Is there a motion? It's been moved and seconded. Seeing nobody in the queue, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? We recommend approval. BL 2020-191, Van Rees, Mendez, and others, authorizes the Department of Water and Sewage Services to provide public water service improvements for RD LLC proposed development, as well as other existing properties in the area. Is there a motion? It's been moved and seconded. Seeing nobody in the queue, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? We recommend approval. That's it. The last thing I'll mention is on those various bond things that we deferred, the sooner people give Mr. Cooper a heads up about either questions or amendments, that would be helpful. I mean, technically, people are going to have until a week from Friday to offer amendments. That'll just be a couple days before we meet again. And if individual districts, council members want to try to get something from their district in it, again, the sooner we know, the better.
We would actually need those requests by Wednesday of that week
So that would
to
be,
give us by rule.
okay, so a week from
A week
Wednesday.
from Wednesday.
All right. With that, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.org.